Hello and welcome to Upstart Goblin University, Hardleg Gaming's guide to tactics and strategy in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm Hardleg Joe, and in this episode I'm going to talk in depth about what a win condition is, tell you about the different kinds of win conditions, and explain how understanding them can help improve your deck building. A win condition describes the cards and tactics that a deck uses to win. A win condition can be nearly anything: a single powerful monster, a group of continuous effects, a series of recycling cards. If it's strong enough to win you the duel, it can be a win condition. Most competitive decks have just one win condition, which they achieve using a specific combo of 2 or 3 cards. Some decks have multiple win conditions and use larger combos, but most of the time simpler is better. The more simple the win condition is, the easier it is to make the deck consistent. Check out my previous u.g.u episode on consistency for why that's a good thing. When deck building, it's a good idea to start with the win condition. Use it as the core of the deck, and design the rest of the deck around it. The two most common mistakes that new players make, aside from not having a win condition to begin with, is not supporting their win condition with the rest of their deck, and overestimating the power of a card or combo, believing it to be a win condition when it isn't. In order to avoid these pitfalls, you need to have a good understanding of what your win condition is trying to accomplish. Now, there are many different kinds of win conditions, but the 3 most common are Beatdown, Lockdown, and Card Advantage, so I'm going to be starting with those. By understanding these categories and knowing which one your deck best fits into, you'll be able to determine if your win condition is powerful enough to succeed, and pick proper support cards. The Beatdown deck is the most common type used in Yu-Gi-Oh! It focuses on attacking your opponent for as much damage as possible as quickly as possible. A good way to measure the strength of a Beatdown deck is to calculate the amount of damage it can potentially deal in one turn. I consider a Beatdown deck viable only if it's able to deal enough damage in one turn to completely defeat my opponent. Doesn't have to be able to do this consistently, but it should at least be possible. The core of a Beatdown deck is its monsters, and the cards needed to summon them or raise their attack. The support for a Beatdown deck should consist either of cards that clear your opponent's field quickly for a direct attack, or cards that protect your monsters from negative card effects. Defensive cards like Mirror Force and Swords of Revealing Light that protect your monsters from attacks rarely belong in Beatdown decks. The focus should be on massive damage as fast as possible, not long-term survivability. If you can defeat your opponent in one turn, you don't need to be defensive, and if you have high attack monsters, the biggest threat to them is being destroyed by card effects, not being destroyed by battle. The second kind of deck I'm going to be talking about, the Lockdown deck, focuses on stopping your opponent from playing, enabling you to attack them at your leisure with less powerful monsters. In order to be viable, a Lockdown deck needs to be able to stop your opponent from summoning before they can launch an offensive. This can be done either directly by negating or restricting the summons themselves, or indirectly by shutting down the spell, trap, and monster effects that allow your opponent to summon their powerful monsters. The core of a Lockdown deck consists of the cards that prevent your opponent from playing, and search power for those cards, since speed is crucial in these kinds of decks. After all, you want to make sure that you can lock down your opponent before they become a threat to you. The support should consist of protection for that core, and cards that cover the gaps in your lock. For instance, if your win condition locks down spell traps, then the support should include something that stops monster effects. Offensive cards that rapidly summon monsters or boost their attack generally don't belong in these kinds of decks. The focus should be on preventing your opponent from playing, not massive amounts of damage. Your opponent can't win if they can't summon monsters to attack you. Finally, there's card advantage decks, which work by generating excessive amounts of card advantage. If you're unfamiliar with the concept, check out my previous u.g.u episode where I explain the concept in detail. The basic idea is that card advantage decks seek to overwhelm your opponent by having way more cards than they do. This can be accomplished with a series of recycling cards that waste your opponent resources, effects that destroy or discard your opponent's cards, or simply drawing a lot. These kinds of decks can be the most difficult to judge, since the power of card advantage is relative to what other cards you're using. For instance, Ghost Tricks are an advantage deck that have some very weak monsters. They require a lot of advantage to be built up over many turns before they can overwhelm their opponents. Another advantage deck, Burning Abyss, has some pretty strong extra deck monsters. This allows them to overwhelm their opponents quickly with just a few cards worth of advantage. Both decks are viable card advantage decks, but their tactics are very different. You can't judge them just on the amount of advantage generated or just on the strength of their monsters. It's a combination of these factors that makes them good in different ways. The only real key to designing a card advantage deck is to follow the rules of card advantage. Make sure that you play cards that offer the most pluses and include as few minuses as possible. Of course, there are many other types of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Besides just those three. Burn, stun, and mill decks, for example, are still viable and somewhat popular. Cards like Exodia and Gimmick Puppet Leo, just to name a few, offer truly alternative win conditions via their effects. Not to mention the strange decks out there that win despite fitting into more than one category or no category at all. These decks, however, are less common, more difficult to design, and far too complex to cover in the course of this one video. If you're still learning how to build a solid deck, I'd recommend starting with Beatdown, Lockdown, or Advantage first, and moving on to decks with other win conditions once you have more experience. Well, that's it for this episode of Upstart Goblin University. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and you'd like to help support future videos, please consider donating to our Patreon. Even donations as small as $1 would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, thanks for watching, good luck, and have fun.